Hi, this is Dwayne Friend with the University of Illinois Extension. If you've got a lawn, garden, or landscape, you may wonder if your soils are providing enough nutrients for the plants you're trying to grow. The best way to find out about this is by taking a soil sample and sending it to a soils lab, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Taking a soil sample is pretty easy. You just need a bucket, a spade, some hand shovels if the soil is dry, and a gallon Ziploc bag or some other plastic-lined bag. What you want to do is get about 6 to 8 samples from throughout the garden, lawn, or landscape and mix them all together in one bucket. So we've already got our hole dug, but depending on what it is you're going to grow will make a difference on how deep you should get your sample. For lawns, you should go down about 4 inches. For gardens, you should go down about 6 to 8 inches. If you're planning on planting trees, you should go down about 12 inches. Now, for getting a soil sample at each location, you don't need a big blob of soil. You just need a thin slice. And if you're using a hand trowel, for example, a lot of them have markings on there to show you how deep you need to go. Since we're working with a lawn, we're just going to deal with a 4-inch depth. And what you do is just go down to that 4-inch depth, pull out a small slice, and that's all you need for each location. Again, you're going to get about 6 to 8 at each location. And you want to make sure you pull off all of the top organic matter as much as you can so that doesn't change the reading. If you have a problem spot, for example, where some plants are not growing very well, take a separate sample for that area. And then once you've got your sample and got it all mixed together, you place about 2 to 3 cups in a plastic Ziploc bag or a plastic-lined bag. Once you've got that amount in there, you want to put on, or before you put that in there, you want to have your name, address, phone number, email, and any other information you'd like to put on there. And if you're going to be doing more than one sample at a time, you want to put a number associated with each sample. Now, I'd recommend contacting several soils labs. What you want to do is tell them what you're planning on growing, find out about their cost, and make sure they're providing university-based recommendations on what to apply if the test says it's needed. A basic soils test should include organic matter, soil pH, potassium, and phosphorus levels, along with a reading called the cation exchange capacity. This lets you know how well your soils will hold nutrients in place. Sampling your soil is the only sure way to know if your soil has any nutrient deficiencies and how much of a soil amendment to apply. For more information, contact your local University of Illinois Extension office. So, you've got your soil test results back from your lawn, garden, or landscape. What do the numbers mean, and what do I need to look for? A basic soil test will provide information in several categories. These will be organic matter, pH, cation exchange capacity, and phosphorus and potassium levels. Let's start with organic matter. Soil organic matter provides insight into how productive a soil will be. The higher the organic matter content of the soil, the more productive the soil. Organic matter helps soils retain water for plants and helps create soil structure, which allows roots to move more easily through the soil. Most of the dark soils in Illinois typically have between 2 and 4% organic matter. Lighter soils usually have 2 to less than 1%. Low organic matter soils may benefit from the addition of organic matter, such as finished compost. pH shows how acidic or alkaline a soil is. The pH scale runs from 0 to 14, with 7 being neutral, above 7 being alkaline, and below 7 being acidic. Most plants prefer a soil pH in the range of 6.3 to 7. Having soil with a high or low pH may limit the ability of plants to take in some nutrients, or it may allow the plants to take in too much. If soil pH needs changed, it's usually because the soil is too acidic. Application of limestone will raise soil pH, while sulfur will decrease pH. Cation exchange capacity, or CEC, indicates how well the soil can hold plant nutrients. The amount of organic matter, which has very high CEC, and the amount and type of clay minerals, which also has a high CEC, affects the overall CEC value in a soil. Soil with a CEC value of 15 to 20 will be in good shape to hold nutrients. Soils with a CEC of 6 or lower will need to be managed closely for nutrient deficiencies such as potassium. Phosphorus is one of 3 nutrients needed in large amounts by plants. The other 2 are nitrogen and potassium. These nutrients are called macronutrients. Phosphorus is vital for energy transfer within a plant and flower and fruit formation. A soil phosphorus level, shown typically with the symbol of P1, of 20 to 40 pounds per acre or 10 to 20 parts per million is sufficient for gardens and landscapes. Too much phosphorus in the soil may allow some to dissolve and may eventually move into ponds and streams, causing excessive plant growth there. Potassium is important for moving water and nutrients around in plants and with enzyme activity. It also plays a role in the growth of stalks and stems for support of the plant. A potassium level of 250 pounds per acre or 125 parts per million or higher shows no additional potassium is needed. Nitrogen is often not included in a basic soil test because it can be very mobile within the soil, with values changing constantly. Most soil labs will provide recommendations on what to apply and how much based on soil test results. The recommendations will be based on university research and scientifically based outcomes. Taking soil tests every 3 to 6 years will let you examine longer-term trends. Are organic matter levels decreasing? How quickly does pH change and in what direction? Examining these trends will help determine how
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. We are the Horticulturists here to answer your gardening questions. My name is Candace Hart. I'm the State Master Gardener Specialist for U of I Extension, and I'm based here in Central Illinois. And I love to chat about flowers of any kind, annuals, perennials, landscaping, cut flowers. Those are the things that I love to chat about. But luckily, we have a couple of other great experts on today who like to talk about other aspects of horticulture. So we're going to start out with introductions. So Kelly, you want to let everyone know what your specialty is?
Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Alsop, and I'm a horticulture educator based out of Bloomington. My specialty on the team is integrated pest management, but I spend most of my time promoting insects. So I love beneficial insects and pollinators. And I love trees. Hey, everybody, did you know I love trees?
Who doesn't love trees, right?
Although I'm not an expert, I dabble in growing my own vegetables throughout the summer.
Excellent.
And I'm Ryan Pankow, horticulture educator out of Champaign. Like Kelly, I love trees. That's my kind of focus area is trees and woody plants, but I'm also like Kelly, I dabble in vegetable gardening, and I've been a native plant enthusiast is kind of maybe my other area, but that brings us to our special guest today. So Erin, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Garrett, and I'm an energy and environmental stewardship educator. And I'm based all the way down in Southern Illinois in the southernmost counties. And my area of expertise is kind of in native plants, plant identification, specifically grass identification. So that's a whole different topic.
Love that.
But I'm really enthusiastic about just getting out and seeing plants and trying to figure out what you're looking at and helping you realize it shouldn't be overwhelming to see and identify plants. So I'm happy to be here today.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you on. Yeah, that's good to know that grass ID is like your thing. Because I get a picture of a grass and I'm like, no idea. So I'm going to send it over to you. So that's excellent.
I've had a student in the past who was going to do botany surveys for his master's degree, and he chose the one with the least amount of grasses.
Good call.
Yeah,
I feel
yeah. They're challenging, but
it's doable.
You can still
right?
do it.
What a cool expertise.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so as you might have saw, our topic for the day is spring ephemerals. So we should probably kind of kick it off by talking about what exactly that means. But also, if everybody who's watching, feel free to start adding questions into the comment box, whether it's about spring wildflowers or about any gardening topic at all. Feel free to start adding those. We're going to start by talking a little bit about these spring ephemerals, and then we'll have plenty of time to answer questions. So feel free to start adding those. But Erin, why don't you kick us off by kind of describing, when we say spring ephemerals, what exactly are we talking about there?
Right. So spring ephemerals are a group of plants that will complete their life cycle in the early spring. So they are going to develop typically in the woods. That's where we're talking about finding spring ephemerals. So they're taking advantage of the trees not having any leaves right now. So that lack of canopy cover to soak up as much sunshine as they can and develop flower and set seed all before that canopy cover comes out. So if we're talking strict spring ephemerals, most of them, their foliage of ground leaves will fade away into the summertime. We'll probably mix in just some other spring wildflowers that you can see today, that you can see throughout the summer as well. But that's kind of the ecology of how spring ephemerals work.
What is the most common spring ephemeral that you find in garden settings?
Ooh, that's a great question. I know bluebells is super popular. Virginia bluebells is one that seems to be easy to plant. I haven't planted it myself, but it seems to be one that is pretty easy to keep going year after year. So,
well, I think an important point, though, is that a lot of these are very sensitive plants that require high quality native areas to thrive. So a lot of them aren't possible in cultivation, really. But so that's what makes them so neat and special. That's why we all pay so much attention to them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Awesome. Well, I think you had some favorite ones that you were maybe going to start us off with, Erin. She had some great pictures to show. So let's start with that.
Definitely. All right. So I kind of wanted to start just with kind of my greatest hits, the ones that I really enjoy finding. So we'll start with three spring ephemerals that have yellow flowers. These are going to be kind of my top three. So the first one is yellow trout lily. And I put this picture up just so you can see how many of them there are, right? There's just tons and tons and tons. We're not just looking for one or two plants on the forest floor, but if you're in the right spot, the spring ephemeral wildflower display is magnificent. So just wanted to throw this one up to showcase that. But if we take a closer look, this plant is it's truly my favorite. It's just stunning. It gets that name, trout lily, from the mottled look of the leaves that you can hopefully see on some of these leaves in the background here. You will see in a good spot hundreds and hundreds of the individual leaves of trout lily popping up, but they won't flower until they have two leaves. So it can take up to 7 or 8 years for these plants to mature and then flower. So the ones that have a pair of leaves will then produce these beautiful yellow flowers. Now, this one in particular is more restricted in where you can find it. So it's found more in southern and eastern Illinois, but there's also a white trout lily that you can find throughout the entire state. That's not one that I've seen myself, but the yellow one is quite beautiful. And an interesting fact about this one too is it has a specialist bee pollinator that will come and visit it. So it doesn't have a common name. Its Latin name is Andrena erythronii. And I say that because if we look at the Latin name of trout lily, it's erythronium. And then the species of that bee is erythronii. So you can see that connection right there, just in their names, that bee is going to come and visit and pollinate this trout lily. So that one's hands down my absolute favorite. If we move to another yellow flower, again, wanted to show kind of the landscape shot so you can see how prevalent that this one is. This is celandine poppy. It's also called wood poppy, and it's not to be confused with celandine, the weed from Europe. So just wanted to put that out there. That's a totally different plant, not the one we're focusing on. This is one that we love to see, and it's really exciting when we find a big colony of it. This one is pretty much exclusively in Southern Illinois, so you'd have to travel down here to find this one growing. But again, super beautiful, unique with those yellow petals. Pretty easy to identify because it's got 4 petals. And I really like this one because it's got really unique hairs. And whenever I can find a hairy plant, I think they're so cute. So this one's got hairs on the buds and then hairs on the fruits as well, on the seed capsules. And something we haven't mentioned yet, but an interesting characteristic of spring ephemerals is a lot of them produce seeds that have an extra structure called an eleasome. And that's like an oil body on the seed that ants are attracted to and will carry away as a food source. So many seeds of spring ephemerals are dispersed by ants because they're coming to take that nice fat back to eat. And then in transporting those seeds, they're then planting them in a different location. So celandine poppy is one whose seeds are dispersed by ants.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Trout lily is too, and this one is too, large flowered bellwort. So to round out our yellow spring ephemerals, large flowered bellwort is another really unique one that I enjoy finding. The coolest thing about this plant is its leaves. So it has something called a perfoliate leaf, and that means it looks like the stem is punctured through that leaf. So really cool characteristic. And then again, unique shaped flowers with those twisted petals. Again, it's going to be visited by those bees that are out early in the spring, and its seeds are dispersed by ants. And this one you can find across Illinois as well. So just at where you can find it.
I love that the botanist said hairy plants are just so cute.
They are.
It's a girl after my own heart.
Gotta love a good pubescent plant, right? Okay, let me see. We've had a couple of comments and I think questions here. We asked folks what their favorite kind of ephemeral was, and one person said May apples. That's definitely a great one. A comment about, yes, love trout lilies. Peggy says that you answered a very long-lasting question she had, so thanks for that. I'm not sure which question it was, but awesome.
You're welcome.
Peggy. And then a question here from Star. She said, I get these flowers most of the year on my celandine poppy. Is it only supposed to be in spring, or should I check to be sure it's actually what it says it is? So would a celandine poppy only be flowering in spring, I'm assuming?
That's my experience. That's when I've seen them flowering. You could have one that's just a little bit off that flowers at a later time, but yep, you might want to just double check your ID of that plant.
So Erin, when I'm out looking at spring ephemerals and I want to ID those plants, do you have a good way of telling me how to ID them?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of spring ephemeral wildflower guides that have been developed that have just a picture and the name of each of those. This is a good time to work on identifying plants because they're in bloom. So, and there's only a set number of flowers that are going to be in bloom right now. So I'm trying to think of the name of it off the top of my head, and I'm not getting it right now. But if you just, look up Illinois Spring Ephemeral Guide, you can find some. There is a great guide to places to hike in Southern Illinois for spring ephemerals, and it has some pictures of them and some some examples of the ones that you can find at different locations listed. And I think we have that to share with you. But yeah, there's a bunch of great guides. I don't have one in particular that I use over another.
But your point on ID is a really good one. And I mention this to folks a lot, that it's this time of year, they're so easy to see. They just pop out. There's no other plants in the way, to confuse you. And so I think for folks that are interested in getting into, native plant identification and things, this is where I started, was with spring ephemerals. And it's kind of like that easy lob pitch of plant ID. It's like there's only 3 or 4 different, you just showed quite a few of the yellow flowers that we could even see. So I think it's just a really great confidence booster, like a great time to be out identifying stuff with some relative ease. So.
Yeah. And flower color is so helpful. I know I can't think of the name of the one on my bookshelf either, but I have one that it's grouped by flower color. So you can take it out with you, flip to the yellow section. Yes, it's that one. Wildflowers. And it just makes it super easy to ID. Yeah.
Yeah, being a horticulturist, I'm sure Candace can share this experience with me. I know a lot of plant ID, but I don't know a lot of native plants.
Yeah.
So when I'm out in the forest, I use the iNaturalist app a lot to help me identify some of the plants that I feel like am on the tip or something, and I don't truly know. So that app really helps me identify plants when I'm out of my element.
Mm-hmm. And I found a great way is just to hike with somebody else that knows this stuff. And I'm really lucky that my wife has like excellent native plant botanical skills. She is 10 times the botanist that I am on native plants. So I've walked with her, and listened to her. But also, the Native Plant Society has a ton of great hikes around the state every spring. And I've been to a ton down in your area, Erin, with the Southern chapter when I lived in Southern Illinois that were just excellent. Have you've got like a group of a dozen just like botany experts on a hike with you. And I mean, they're really friendly. We brought our kids to those and things. And that's another great way. Some of those organized spring wildflower hikes. I know there's quite a few down your way, and probably some up here in Central Illinois and across the state, really.
Yeah, super helpful. Okay, let's see. We had a couple of other questions. Kelly, can you see that app again? It is the letter I and then Naturalist, right? Is the name of that app?
iNaturalist.
iNaturalist.
And what it does is you can, when you take the picture and submit it, you can hit the suggestions button, and it generates, 4 or 5 suggestions, sometimes more. But then later on, you'll get, and that'll give you instant gratification. Mm-hmm. But later on, scientists like Erin will go on and identify those for you and make sure they're identified correctly. And then the iNaturalist app actually uses all that information to track plants. So not only are you getting it identified, it's contributing to science.
Mm-hmm.
And another really cool feature is it shows you on the map around other folks' observations. So you can look around and see like, oh, has anybody seen celandine poppy at this site? And maybe if not, and you find it, you're the first person to report it. So I think folks really get into that. I've just kind of messed around with it. I've just kind of looked to see, just out of curiosity, what other people have reported in natural areas around my house. But I never really have recorded an observation. But super cool, and lots of folks are using it. It's just ever growing.
Yeah, that's a great one for sure.
Yeah, I started using it during the urban tree identification project.
Yeah, because it's not just natives necessarily either, right, Kelly? You can do any landscape plant.
And it's not just plants.
It's not just plants, yeah. I use it for insects.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, let's see. I think we had another question come through so far. Keep those questions coming. Victoria asked, trying to restore a forested ravine that was overtaken by invasive honeysuckle. The main trees are oak and hickory with some pines. Is there a resource for establishing or reestablishing a native forest floor? What would you suggest?
Well, yeah, I've done a lot of this work. Before I came to Extension, I was an area forester in Southern Illinois. That's why I have lived down there for a long time and just I love seeing your pictures, Erin, of the Rocky Bluffs in the background. I mean, I could tell that was Southern Illinois just from the first pick. But, in general, just kind of like we talked about, a lot of these ephemerals are really sensitive plants and require that kind of high quality ecosystem. There's not really a great place where you can just say, go buy a bunch of seeds of these plants and broadcast them in the forest. So generally, as a forester, my recommendation is always get rid of the invasives, control the invasives. And then it's just kind of like you have to wait. You have to be patient and wait for the ecological response you get. And hopefully, in my case, I bought in our place that we live at up here in Central Illinois, I had a woodland full of honeysuckle that we have worked hard. My wife gets a ton of credit for that too, taking all that honeysuckle out. And our neighbor just to the east has a ton of bluebells. And now we're starting to see those bluebells coming in and coming back in our woodland. And so it's not, I always get that question though, like after I take out the honeysuckle, what should I replace it with? And well, the answer is ecology, nature kind of takes care of that. And really a major aspect of removing that honeysuckle is getting little oak seedlings in there. Because if you didn't, you'd have an understory of honeysuckle. 100 years from now, all the oak trees died, they're the canopy, and then you've got a thicket of honeysuckle and nothing in there. So really as a forester, I'm really concerned about seeing a lot of those little oak seedlings in there. That is something you could hand plant back in, either with acorns or seedlings, or like in my little woodland, mine's only a little, like an acre and a half or something. I've actually bought 5-gallon potted oak trees that I'm putting back in spots. And so that's kind of my recommendation is you just kind of have to let those spring ephemerals kind of come in. We mentioned bluebells you can find in cultivation. They're transplanted kind of like it's whole plants, or you can get seeds. Spring beauties, I don't know if we'll get to those in your slides, Erin, but spring beauties are another one I've seen as bulbs you can get. So there's some you can kind of get and add. Really, we don't ever recommend taking those from other natural areas. Again, they're so sensitive. You really need to leave those populations alone. So while I know it's super motivating to try and get some stuff in there, I'm just getting the honeysuckle out is like the biggest and best thing you could do for your woodlands. And now it's time to just see what you have out there and what your woodlands can support over time with native plants. So.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Ryan, is there a correlation between fire and a more immediate response?
There could be, just because fire is a part of these native forested ecosystems throughout the Midwest. Whether we think about them that way or not, I know a lot of folks think of fire as a part of Western ecosystems because of the aridness there. But even here in the humid Midwest, fire has been a part of our ecosystems for many thousands of years, either human-induced or naturally occurring across the landscape. Nowadays, we have all these little tiny subdivided blocks of land. So we don't have like extensive fire in the landscape like we used to in pre-settlement times, in the days where, indigenous folks, Native Americans were the people here before all of us Europeans came and chopped it up and divided it and turned it into ag fields and urban areas and all the things that we did. So fire is definitely a very missing part of a lot of tracts of forested land. And if you look at, across Illinois, what's the forested land ownership look like? About 80% of forested land in Illinois is in private ownership. It's folks like me that have little tiny acre and a half. Or if you look at the average parcel size, it's around 20 acres. So that becomes just a really hard thing to manage as an ecosystem, like an extensive hardwood forest like Southern Illinois used to be, 500 years ago. It's hard to manage them on those individual sizes. So fire is a very important part of that. And on my place, I don't really have a great way to do a fire. I don't have a great division between me and neighbors to stop that fire from escaping. So I really haven't done a lot of fire here in Central Illinois at my place. I really wish I could. And it's something we're working towards having some better breaks on the edges of our property. So yeah, Kelly, that is a great point, that fire is part of the life cycle of these plants. And it's something that can bring them back a little quicker, or it just really promotes that ecosystem that these plants would have naturally evolved in and existed in. I do kind of worry about with spring ephemerals and just the fact that in my particular woodland, I've kind of like we're talking about in this example, I've taken out honeysuckle over the last 2 or 3 years very aggressively. I've changed things. I worry that in my case, putting a fire through there just some of these really sensitive spring ephemerals, I don't want to have a negative impact to either. There's kind of two sides of the coin. At an ecosystem level, fire is an awesome thing. Really does promote native plants and this regeneration of that ecosystem. But my tiny woodland where I have invasive species that I've manipulated, and I guess a big problem I have now that bush honeysuckle is gone is I have winter creeper euonymus all over the understory and getting thicker in places now that honeysuckles came out. So that's what I was really considering maybe trying to burn small patches of this spring. And I kind of missed the window because now I feel like spring wildflowers are coming up. I just really kind of don't want to disturb them because I have such a changing ecosystem there. So, fire has to be used kind of carefully and with interpretation of your site and what's happened and just how you're managing things. So
I do have another question. So Erin, I added in, I sent a link to the other Erin for a invasive species management guide that was put out by University of Illinois and Martin Arboretum, and there's a few other partners on there. Mm-hmm. Do you, of course, as an environmentalist, I know what you're going to say, but do you see invasive species being the biggest challenge for spring ephemerals?
I mean, it's definitely up there. I mean, anything that is a threat to the overall health of a forest, right? So it could be, like Ryan said, not having oak regeneration so that eventually that forest is going to change its composition over time. Part of that is because of invasive species, right? So, I mean, I definitely think they're up there. They're a big concern. It's something to be mindful of, to be aware of, to know what you have on your property and to be responsible and manage it. So I know I'm dealing with it too. We have a tree in our yard that's in the boundary of 3 yards, and I just realized that it's technically on our side, and I need to get the winter creeper off of it because it's out of control. So being aware and doing what you can. I mean, they're obviously going to have a negative impact on spring ephemerals. So, and it might not just be the ground cover, but they can alter the soil as well. So there's a lot of different things at play. So definitely managing them is important for the health of spring ephemerals. Definitely.
Yeah, we know that just all native plant diversity goes down drastically when invasives are there. And we've kind of talked about honeysuckle. It's a really good point about altering the soil environment because there's allelopathy associated with bush honeysuckle where it essentially stops the growth of other plants underneath it. So when you get it in the woodlands thick enough, you just really have nothing else in the understory. So there's, even other nasty tricks like that at play from these invasives. So really a bad deal.
We had a comment about garlic mustard too. That would be one that would potentially crowd out spring ephemerals, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Another with allelopathic tendencies.
Let's see. I think we have a couple other comments here. Victoria commented, we're afraid that if we do a controlled burn for forest floor debris, we'll get much more erosion. They have about 4 acres. Any comment about erosion and controlled burns?
Yeah. Well, I went to grad school at SIU in the forestry department, and I studied actually forest hydrology, so water movement through the forest. So I've looked at a lot of different types of erosion in different ag and forested settings. And I don't know if that like a research paper ever resulted from some of the research SIU was doing at the time. And I mean, this is back in like 2005 and 6. But they took there was a grad student then that was looking at that very question of, do we increase sedimentation of streams following prescribed burning? And really at the time, and again, I don't know if there was a publication out of this, I never read the thesis, but at the time, preliminary results were really showing surprisingly little difference between burned and unburned, control plots. And some of the reason for that is just that when you burn an area, whether it's a prairie or a woodland, there's still a layer of stuff there that sticks around that you don't burn all the way down to the soil typically. And especially in a woodland burn, what I found, doing years and years of prescribed burns in Southern Illinois, is heck, half the time we were doing good just to get an effective burn on the ground. And most of the time it barely burns. If you think about trying to get a fire to light all that leaf litter everywhere that's matted to the ground, can be wet. It's really spotty, the woodland burn you get. So I think between a combination of just having low fire intensity in spots where moisture is being held, and the fact that not all that duff layer is consumed, you still have a protective layer over the soil after a burn. So that's a question I got a lot as a forester: is are my hillsides going to just slide into the creek? And the answer is no. But if you're really worried about that, if you really have steep slopes, kind of the recommendation is maybe to wait till spring for this burn, where you can, burn it sometime in the spring burn window, where then you quickly have plant growth coming back in, as opposed to burning in fall, having it sit as bare as possible all winter. So that's maybe a way to lower that impact. But and I haven't read a ton of other research. I just kind of have experience with that. One little SIU study that was going on, my own personal experience from looking at and observing these burns and thinking about this erosion question. And so really, I think in my understanding of it, there's not a huge erosion risk, but timing of burn, if you time it in spring, maybe is a little better to just ensure you don't have some erosion. So.
Okay, good tips. Okay, we've had a couple of other comments asking about favorite ephemerals. We had someone say winter aconite. Someone asked, is spring beauty considered a spring ephemeral? If so, that's one of their favorites, and it is correct. Awesome. And then we've had a lot of great resources being shared in the comments, so thanks everybody for that. But let's see, I think we had a couple other questions. Erin, can you talk about wild leeks and how they flower later than when they leaf out? Maybe why they grow that way. And this is from Peggy. So they're out right now up here in Northern Illinois.
Yeah, that's not one that I really know too much about, wild leeks. I just, so if anyone else wants to jump in on them, on why they leaf out first and then flower, is that?
Yeah, that's what she said, yeah.
Actually, I was kind of looking through wildflower pictures and things before this show. I've got a ton of photography of leeks. There's a little natural area around my house that has a ton of them. And I was looking for a picture of the flower, which I don't have. It seems like I notice all the foliage, and I don't know if I don't know the process for that plant, but it's definitely one that's really cool to see. And when it's healthy, I mean, that's a sign of a really healthy woodland if you have a good leek population. I think another interesting aspect of those is the harvesting side of that, where in certain parts of the country, they're a delicacy. They have like a really oniony flavor. Folks eat them, and there's problems with leek festivals and over harvesting and a lot of stuff in other places. So that's kind of come up recently in conversations surrounding morel mushrooms too, that's something you can harvest from the woodlands right now, but we certainly don't want to over harvest. And as you're looking at that or observing these populations or thinking about harvesting some things, be sure to check the regulations. I have spent most of my time morel hunting, spring wildflower hunting and things in the Shawnee National Forest, where a lot of those things, I don't know about leeks, but morels are okay to collect there. Where Central Illinois, up here in a lot of the natural areas around me, it is not permitted mushroom collecting. So, I mean, the same goes for leeks, that you really need to check the regulations and rules for whatever it is, whether it's a state park, national forest, or county preserves, or where I spend a lot of my time here in Central Illinois, and rules differ. But I don't know a lot about the ecology of leeks and their flowering. So.
Yeah, Peggy said their flowers are on an umbel when the leaves are all gone. So that is an interesting kind of pattern. She said maybe they want all their energy into leaf growth for survival. She has no idea. So we'll have to do some research on that.
I wonder if it has something to do with their pollinators. Maybe the pollinators are out at a different time. The leaves come out early to maximize the no tree canopy, all the sunlight, and might have something to do with that.
Yeah, it says in the book that the leaves wither away before the flowering time. Because I was like, when I saw the foliage, I was like, because I'm thinking with wild leeks kind of took me off a bit because it's ramps, right?
I was just going to ask that. Is it the same thing as ramps?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ramps.
Okay.
So, I mean, I've never correlated the wider leaves of the foliage to the flower, which I've seen the flower, it's very much like a a garlic type of flower.
Yeah. We're learning.
You can almost smell that garlicky smell though. There when you come up on them. There's a county preserve that I run in close to my house, and like I can tell when those things are starting to come up this time of spring because I can smell it before I even round the corner where all the leeks are. You can kind of smell it in the air.
Yeah. And Star asked, are they related to amaryllis? What family are they in, Kelly? Does it say?
They're in the lily family.
Yeah. So not quite related to amaryllis, but not too far off.
And remember that question that I had on here where they were like, how do I get rid of wild onions from my lawn? And I said, why would you want to get rid of
Yeah. I enjoy the fragrance as I mow them every time.
I enjoy the flavor of them.
I can sell it anytime, every time. Let's see, a couple other things. Back to kind of our invasives conversation, a comment here about needing a way to incentivize municipalities, park districts, IDOT to deal with honeysuckle and other invasives. They are dense along road corridors. Any comment on that about kind of what is the challenge of dealing with all of this honeysuckle and others?
Well, it's a massive challenge. A lot of these forest preserve districts and other places, park districts, just simply don't have the staff time and the hours it takes to remove the honeysuckle to start with. So I feel their pain in that into things. I mean, if you want to put a monetary value on it, if you were going to hire a contractor to come out and remove a really thick stand of bush honeysuckle, I mean, it's anywhere from $300 to $500 an acre for that treatment of just the initial removal. And then you have at least a year or two of follow-up to make sure that population is stamped out. And then you have continued follow-up going forward forever, because that came in from a seed source somewhere. Like, in my case, I have neighbors that have honeysuckle that you can see right along the fence line, boom, a big, wall of that honeysuckle. And so it's spread by berries and birds fly around and eat the berries. And so it's just a massive problem. And I think places, parks, park districts, other places that start to just, kind of prioritize high priority areas and peck away at it. That's sometimes the best they can do with the staff they have. And, trying to illustrate it with cost there, I think is the best way I can explain it to folks. But it's a continual problem where the nice thing with honeysuckle is that once you get those initial big shrubs out of there, it's just little 1-year-old seedlings that come back. And now I've got my woodland to a point where I can walk through and just pull those 1-year-old. You can hand pull those because they have a really weak root system. And it's a common thing I do when I'm walking through the woods and I see a little honeysuckle any place. I'm ripping them up and just tossing them to the side. So that's the idea. That's kind of the goal with honeysuckle is to get to a point where you just have those little tiny seedlings you're pulling. You're not having, because the larger plants, you're needing to cut the stump. And it really doesn't do any good unless you put a herbicide on that. And you guys have heard me on this show. I'm a very, very organic person, especially with vegetable garden production. But when it comes to invasive species, that's where I am okay with using chemicals because they have an unfair advantage here in our ecosystem. They've been brought from somewhere else. And that's why they're so easy to establish and they take over. They just have this different ecological niche and they get here and they take over. So it takes really oftentimes takes a chemical herbicide to really take care of those plants. And so the goal is, just to get down to the point where you can walk through and pretty quickly just hand pull what's coming back in. And I would always kind of try and coach landowners that, it's not necessarily eradication you're going for, but bringing this invasive down to a controllable level where you can handle it on year to year. Because it's just with bush honeysuckle, it's like the comment said, it's every place. Like if you drive around at the right time of year where you can really see it, it's everywhere. It's in fence rows. It's in people's backyards. It's in natural areas. And we're just never going to get rid of that seed source. So you just kind of have to have that mindset of not necessarily eradication, but like bringing it to a manageable level for the long term.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's interesting thinking about roadsides too. And to get back to the idea of incentivizing, not with honeysuckle, but the example that comes to mind for me is Callery pear. So again, thinking about how are those species getting out into those natural areas? So it's blooming now for us here. So I was driving yesterday and I saw the beautifully manicured planted Callery pear. And then right next to it is the like disturbed area with all of the weeds and everything growing. And then you see all of the Callery pears that have popped up and grown over time there. So again, bringing it back to, awareness among the public about invasive species and how you can take actions to manage them on your own land so that they can't escape out right into those areas as well. So kind of cutting off the entry point. And with Callery pear in particular, I think in Missouri and possibly in Indiana, they've done an incentive program where if you cut down your Callery pear and take a picture, then you can get a native tree in return for doing that. So
nice.
I know we cut ours down in our yard. We didn't do it for an incentive. We just did it because it was young and easy to get rid of. I don't think the neighbors were too happy, but it's cool.
There's kind of an interesting story with Callery pear that it came from ornamental horticulture. It's a non-native and now has become reproductive. It was originally developed as like a sterile cultivar. But you can, just like Erin kind of noted, when it's flowering, it's like the only thing that's a tree that has a pyramidal form that has white flowers. So it was one of those that it was like that reality check when I finally saw that. Or, I was driving around at the right time of spring and saw all these white flowers everywhere. It's like, I wonder what that plant is. And you kind of stop and look a little closer and identify it. It's like, oh my gosh. That plant that I'm seeing everywhere along the Route 13 corridor in Southern Illinois is Callery pear. And so it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem just in the last couple of decades, really, as it's really start to spread. But
I have a very serious question for you, Erin. First of all, Candace and I apologize for our industry because it is our industry, the landscape and horticulture industry, that is distributing some of these very invasive plants like burning bush and barberry and Callery pear and ivy and all these winter creepers. Tell me, what do you think in your head when you're in a greenhouse or a garden center and you see these plants for sale? Is it hard?
Well, I was there yesterday and looking at what was for sale. It's hard. It's a challenge to see because, and again, if we rewound, 5 to 10 years ago, and I went shopping for plants, I wouldn't have known, and I would just pick what was pretty and what I wanted to put in my yard. So that awareness is growing about the importance of natives and the difference between planting native and planting, a non-native cultivar or variety. So that's really great, but it is, there's nothing that tells you, right, at the store, the impacts of what you're purchasing. And then there are certain invasives that are just the real money makers. So getting those off the market is just a huge barrier. Burning bush is the one that comes to mind. Is we see the impacts of it, and but it's still being sold. So if you're out looking, especially in like catalogs, if there's a plant that says will not ship to, and there's a bunch of states listed next to it, even if it doesn't say Illinois, that's a good indicator that there's probably a reason why you might want to hesitate on getting that, because it has some invasive tendency usually is what that is indicating. So just being mindful, doing your research. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to go and see all of the things that I'm trying to chop out of my, home landscape and I see escape into natural areas. So it's an ongoing challenge.
I think it's a vicious circle too. Like it's not necessarily the horticulture industry can be blamed, but also we as consumers are buying these products.
Yeah.
So like Erin's recommendation of educate yourself before you buy anything, that's the single best thing you can do as a plant person, is just make sure what you're planting isn't part of this problem and you aren't, by buying it, creating demand for that plant. So
yeah, that's what I was just going to say too. It's not going to go off the market until enough consumers don't buy it, that it's not worth selling. Yeah. So as much as we can do to educate and put it out there, we're going to keep doing it.
I guilt my master gardeners and master naturalists, and I'll say, if you're a real gardener and naturalist, you'll get rid of that plant and replace it with a native. They're like, Kelly, I don't want to get rid of it. And like, you don't have to, but
Kelly's going to guilt you. We had a question here. Is Callery pear the same as Bradford pear? Yes, Bradford is a cultivar of a Callery pear, indeed. Yes. Okay, let's see. We had a couple of questions back when we were talking about honeysuckle. Let's get a little more specific there. We're talking specifically about bush honeysuckle because we had a question, is there a honeysuckle that isn't invasive? And another question, is honeysuckle a problem in suburban areas? I thought it was a good plant for pollinators. My neighbors is starting to creep to my fence. Do I need to control it essentially? So talk about this specific kind of honeysuckle, if you would, that we're talking about.
Well, we're talking about is bush honeysuckle, which is kind of a generic name for probably 3 or 4 species of non-native, woody, shrubby honeysuckles that, honestly, I don't know that I could tell the difference between the 3 different species if I have them side by side in a woodland. They all kind of function the same. They all kind of do the same thing. Where on the native side, Erin, maybe you would know better than me what our native honeysuckles are. I can't say that I could list them off, but there are honeysuckles that are native to the Midwest, but the big difference I think we'd see is that a native honeysuckle does not have that invasive character and is not taking over a woodland compared to the non-native. So
they're the native, and I'm not super familiar with them. They're just not as prevalent and they don't act the same way. So yes, it is a big problem in suburban settings as well. And again, you may not, depending on where you live, you may not see it escaping, but we talked about that roadside, right? It might not escape into the woods because you don't have them near you, but it can escape onto the roadside and then that can continue to spread and spread and spread. So, it's hard. A lot of these invasive plants, we like them. They smell really great or they're beautiful. We like to have them. I know it was hard for my husband when I said, honeysuckle, no, it's got to go, because we took out a hedge of it that we had. He's like, but it smells so good and I love seeing the bees. I said, well, we're going to replace it with something else that hopefully will also smell great and bring the bees, but it's native. So just kind of comparing those larger ecological impacts that could happen because of what's in your yard.
Excellent. Good point. Let's see. Another follow-up on honeysuckle. We had a comment about ticks, and ticks indeed do like the environment of a very dense honeysuckle establishment. And Ryan, you want to touch on quick kind of chemical control? They asked for best chemical control for honeysuckle, but do you want to just give a quick overview of chemical control?
Really it's, so you need to cut off the stump and cut off the shrub and as quickly as possible, get a treatment on the stump. And that's a common mistake, that get your cut close to the ground. Cause if it's, I once had a landowner cut them all off like at chest height where they could just really easily cut everything. Well, and that's easy because you don't have to bend over, but then you have to get that chemical to translocate all the way down to the roots. So cut it as close to the ground as you can, treat as quick as possible. Always follow your label recommendations, but something as simple as a glyphosate at a higher concentrate than you would spray on foliage. So a little more concentrated form of glyphosate is very effective. There's probably some chemicals to avoid. Picloram, commonly sold as Tordon, is like the trade name, is probably one I usually recommend folks avoid because it's very mobile in the environment. It does an excellent job of killing honeysuckle, but we've seen lots of examples in woodlands where it's even killed overstory trees from that translocation, movement in the soil and absorption from other plants. So I usually kind of recommend, glyphosate is kind of the first and easiest to get, cheapest method. Triclopyr, that's different than picloram. The Tordon is picloram. Triclopyr is another chemical name of a product that's commonly mixed with 2,4-D and crossbow, crossroads. That's kind of some of the names of that's another very effective stump treatment. But a lot of times you can go to a garden center and just buy a product that's labeled for stump killer or stump remover, and just make sure you don't have that picloram in there, because that's what is really mobile. And those products work very well. Just follow the label and apply them quickly after your cut are probably the best recommendations.
Excellent.
Ryan,
that management guide we linked earlier will also have some of this in there too. So
he has specific rates. He has what to put with them. Like, do you need another chemical to like a basil oil? I just think it's really helped me answer a lot of questions. It's a really good, what do I do? This is exactly what you do.
Perfect. Yep, we got that in the comments, I believe, so you can scroll back up. Okay, let me check on our comments here. We've got about 10 minutes or so left, so keep those questions coming. Let's see, a comment here about she's found that many people have horrible allergies when Bradford pears bloom. Yeah, there's a lot of pollen going around when those are blooming, that's for sure.
Suffering right now. So.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're caught up on questions. So Erin, you want to show us maybe some more of those favorite spring ephemerals while we see if any...
Yeah, back to wildflowers.
Yeah. Back to the pretty stuff. That's good to have, right?
All right. Are we seeing that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
All right. So we can't talk about spring ephemerals without talking about bloodroot. And bloodroot is in full bloom down in southern Illinois, where I am at. And this is one that I usually miss. It's in between the spring beauties and then kind of the next big flush. And so I'm usually not out hiking in between because there isn't too much else going on. But I was lucky enough to catch it last week, blooming, really easy to identify. Its flowers have at least 8 petals, so that's a little bit different and really easy to count those quickly and note what you're looking at. It gets that name bloodroot because the roots, and you might be able to see it a little bit on this stem, looks a little reddish. They have a reddish juice or sap. So if you were, don't do this, but if you were to pull up a bloodroot, you would be able to see that red root. It is pollinated by a bunch of bees. I'm going to play just a quick video. There's no sound, just so you can see how slow moving this bee is. So it's still cold out. He's not working real hard yet. But there's a whole bunch of different types of bees, from bumblebees to carpenter to mining, lots of different bees that you can find on bloodroot at this time. Again, like the other ones we talked about, its seeds are distributed by ants because they have that structure on them that gives the ants a little bonus for picking them up and moving them. Bloodroot, the leaves will continue to grow after the flowers have been spent. This is a cluster of leaves here, and it confused me the first time I just saw the leaves because they were larger than my head in like May, and I couldn't believe it because I couldn't connect this small, delicate little flower with these giant leaves that had continued to grow over time, but it was in fact bloodroot. The leaves I think are pretty easy because they're lobed and they look really crinkled. So like you took a piece of paper and crumpled it and then uncrumpled it. But really, really cool. Love bloodroot. And it's flowering now here, so it should be coming. You can find it throughout the whole state.
Yeah, Karen commented it just started blooming in central Illinois. So.
Great, awesome. It's coming. Okay, and next up is trillium. I couldn't pass up the trilliums. If you're familiar with Southern Illinois, there's a trail called Trillium Trail. This is where this picture is taken. Highly recommend it. And you can see this is just one view of the forest floor completely covered in trilliums. These are white trilliums. There are a few different kinds that you can find. And this one you can find kind of northern and southern Illinois, but not really anywhere in between. And it looks kind of like another one called large flowered trillium, which also will have white flowers. But if we get up close, the stigmas are curved on this one, okay? And that's an easy way to tell them apart. So that's just one characteristic to look for. We can remember that one. We've got curved stigmas here, and that helps tell us that we're looking at white trillium. Again, its seeds are distributed by ants. That's the common theme today. Cool. And then I just wanted to point out these two as well, because they're super fun. We have Dutchman's breeches and squirrel corn. And these two look extremely similar when you just have the foliage. So you might be able to see some of the leaves in the background on the slides here. I can't tell them apart until they're blooming. Dutchman's breeches is more widespread than squirrel corn, but really, really cute looking flowers, and kind of poses the question of what pollinator could pollinate these flowers, because they don't look like they are, they're not like the bloodroot, right? They don't have a landing pad. It doesn't I can't tell you where the nectar is at right now. So these are mostly pollinated by queen bumblebees because they have the tongue length and the size and the strength that they're able to pry open at the base of the flower and then get the nectar inside. Now, there are other sneaky bees that will come and chew a hole in the flower to get the nectar. So they cheat because they're not strong enough to get inside. But these two are super fun. I saw both of them just starting to bloom for us down here in Southern Illinois. So keep an eye out for those as spring keeps coming.
Nice. That's what Dicentra is one that I love to add in my landscape garden. That's one I have pretty good success with. Love it. Awesome. We had a comment from Troy. He said snow trilliums are in full bloom mode in Peoria County. So that's good to hear. They're in central Illinois as well. Awesome. Okay. I think, let me check our questions again. We've got about 5 minutes left. So if you have any final lingering questions about spring ephemerals or any other gardening topic, we can definitely hit them today. But while we wait, any other ones you want to kind of touch on, Erin, or any other favorites maybe we didn't get to today?
I have a request.
Oh, please do.
I want her to show me the green dragons.
Do you have pictures, Erin?
Right. Green dragon, right?
Yeah, so green dragon, not a spring ephemeral, but an awesome spring wildflower. I'm going to just go through here. So if you're not familiar with green dragon, you might be familiar with Jack in the Pulpit. So they are related to each other, but this plant is just so unique. The leaves, it forms a U-shaped structure that all of the leaflets grow off of. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but it's usually pretty prominent. And then it's one of those plants that produces a spathe and a spadix for its flowering structure. So you can see here this yellow structure that can get between 6 and 12 inches. And they'll flower late May. And then it will produce this cluster of berries that is green now, but then will mature to be orange or red. So kind of like the same thing as the Jack in the Pulpit in that structure that you'll find, but definitely unique. I thought it was somewhat hard to find. And then when I was hiking, I started finding them all over the place. Typically in the woods, but I found this one in the middle of a restored prairie next to a woodland area. So that one was kind of weird. But really, really cool.
Prevalent where you are, Erin, versus us, right?
Yeah, not off the top of my head. I don't really know its distribution.
It's just I've always seen it when I'm in Southern Illinois, but I've not seen it here.
That wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a cool one.
So thank you. I love it. Thank you.
Had that for you in the back.
Let's see, a couple other comments here. How about shooting star? Would that fall into this category?
Not sure if it's a true spring ephemeral, if that foliage, and Ryan, I don't know if you know, if that foliage will completely wither away. I want to say it sticks around into the summertime. But it's definitely one of those spring, kind of later into May, you'll start to see shooting star in bloom. And that is also, I say this all the time, but it is one of my favorites. So there's a few different species. There's one that you can find more in prairies. There's one that you can find in the woodlands. There's a really, really restricted one, French's shooting star, that only grows in a couple sites in Southern Illinois under I think it's sandstone. Don't quote me on that. I think it's under sandstone ledges. So yeah, definitely one to keep an eye out as we move into later spring.
Nice. Yeah, a couple comments that they've just broken ground, so they are
Awesome.
They're coming. Okay, let's see. Couple final ones. Pest question here. What should I introduce to keep the green aphids? I think is what you mentioned, Star. Green aphids in check. Kelly, you want to touch on green aphids?
If you put that plant outside, most likely beneficial insects will come and take care of that aphid population without you even trying. I love finding aphids in the landscape because they're, what do I like to say? Candace, what's my saying?
I don't remember. Which one? You have a lot of them.
They're big, dumb, and full of sugar.
Oh, yeah, that
dumb
one.
and full of sugar. So
that one. How could I forget?
Beneficial insects are constantly seeking them out. If you have a population and the beneficial insects, maybe it's big and the beneficial insects are slowly building away, you can always spray hard water spray on them and knock their little mouthpieces off and they fall to the ground. They'll find their sugar, their food for something, right?
Yeah.
So I usually don't see aphids as a huge landscape issue. I know I see them all over milkweeds, but we know we don't want to spray milkweeds because of the monarchs. So not a pest to pull your chemical arsenal out for. That's for sure. Put it outside.
Let nature take its
Yeah, I've just handpicked them off milkweed because I kind of don't like the look. Yeah, it kind of cripples the plant, it seems like, but they're pretty easy to mechanically remove.
I like to squish them.
I was just going to say, they give them a good squish. Yeah. Okay, let's see. A couple final things. Mary had a question for you, Ryan. Do you write forest management plans, or did you in the past probably?
I did in the past, yeah, but not anymore. I don't know, since I've came to Extension, I'm too busy with too many other things and my kids are getting bigger. So now but there's a list of consulting foresters online that U of I Extension maintains that has kind of, list by region of the state and kind of list what they do. So they'll have a little box check for forest management plans. So there's a ton of folks out there to write them. So you should be able to find somebody. Excellent.
Let's see. A success story about restoring a woodland property and being rewarded with flowers. So that's good to hear. Took them over 15 years to remove honeysuckle and buckthorn. So stick with it. It's good to hear. May asked, I left the seeds on my one and only Jack in the Pulpit. Should I do something different to encourage additional plants? Anything else besides leaving the seeds on? Just having a good environment, right? Kind of like you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we'll finish it off with this one. Is there a shade-loving native? You want to give us your favorite shade-loving native to put in?
So any of the ones that we've talked about, any spring ephemeral, right? You have to think about if they're a true spring ephemeral and their foliage will wither away, right? That will then be, an empty spot in your garden if you have a huge patch of them. So kind of interspersing them with other plants. I planted wild ginger in my shade garden in the fall. I planted bare roots. So I have my fingers crossed that they come up this year. They will spread, but that's kind of what I'm looking for in my garden bed. But that's one that I am particularly fond of.
Nice.
I
love a good.
I love wild ginger.
Yeah, that's a good one. I love a good columbine, a good native columbine mixed in. Would be my choice.
Wild geranium's a really good one. It kind of keeps it. It's maybe not a spring ephemeral because it does keep some foliage around, but I like it because it kind of is a ground cover of foliage. Then, so I've had it kind of creeping in from the woodlands around my property. I'm starting to kind of just remove crappy invasive plants and let it kind of take over slowly over time. But that's a good one.
Awesome. Cool. Well, you guys had some amazing questions today. Really great participation. So we appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. Thank you, Erin, for being on with us. I think we're all excited now to get outside and go for a hike and look for some of these guys. So We appreciate it. We hope to see you back again, everybody. Our next show will be April 8th. So in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about cool season vegetables. So switching gears and getting started with some of those vegetables we can get out in the garden. So we hope you'll join us then. Thank you, everybody. We will see you in 2 weeks. Have a good rest of the week.